Thing, they thought victory was guaranteed because they stacked the deck before the game even began. They tampered with the rules, pulled strings behind closed doors. Thing, and whisper themselves that the outcome was already decided. To them, rigging the game was the only way they could feel secure. They didn't trust their own ability to win fairly. Yet even in their scheming, they underestimated the one thing they could never manipulate: you. And they never expected someone to learn the board so well that even a rigged setup could not stop them. While they played with trickery, you studied patterns. While they cheated, Thing, you sharpened discipline. So when the final moment came, their entire advantage turned useless, and you schooled them in front of everyone without even breaking a sweat. There is something humiliating about being outplayed, even after rigging the match. They thought the game was a performance, where the winner was chosen before the audience even arrived. But you refused to accept their script. You understood that cheating is always a sign of weakness, never strength. And weakness becomes easy to expose when pressure mounts. They put every obstacle in front of you expecting you to trip. You didn't trip. You turned the obstacles into stepping stones. Every rigged move became a lesson you flipped against them. When the final score arrived, you didn't just win. You showed them their tricks were small compared to your patience. That is a lesson no cheat can recover from. In relationships, they cheat in the same way. They manipulate to stay ahead, lie to keep control, and rig emotional games to ensure they are never vulnerable. They believe that deception makes them powerful. But the truth is simpler. They cheat because they are terrified of losing. You schooled them by refusing to play the same game. You did not lower yourself to their level. You moved above it. You let their lies expose themselves. You let their manipulation tie its own knot. The beauty of your approach is that the truth always comes with time, and when it did, their empire of tricks collapsed under the weight of reality. You didn't need revenge. You only needed patience. Psychology proves that cheaters are addicted to shortcuts. They cannot stand the grind of discipline, so they manufacture unfair advantages. But shortcuts only delay the inevitable. They do not change it. You knew that the long road, though heavier, would always lead to mastery. They built temporary comfort. You built permanent strength. That is why when the game grew harder, they panicked, while you thrived. You weren't surprised by resistance. You were prepared for it. Every rigged turn only confirmed what you already expected. They cheated because they had to. You won because you chose to. The contrast between those truths is what made their defeat sting so deeply. They thought they could erase your growth with tricks. They thought they could slow your progress by bending rules. But they forgot that pressure is a mirror. When the lights grew bright, their cheats exposed them. People saw the panic in their movements, the inconsistency in their words, the desperation behind their actions. You, on the other hand, remained calm. Your composure became your sharpest blade. By keeping steady, you made their chaos scream louder. The schooling came not only from the fact that you won, but from the way you won, with clarity, with focus, with undeniable proof that even when tilted against you, the game still belonged to you. In life, people cheat because they are too impatient to wait for the harvest. They want the fruits without the planting, the applause without the training. They think by skipping steps they gain time. But time has a way of humbling cheaters. Every step skipped becomes a weakness hidden under the surface. You schooled them because you didn't skip. You built every piece, endured every repetition, walked through every lesson. And when the game revealed its true weight, they buckled under the weight of their own shortcuts. Your strength came from carrying everything they tried to avoid. They underestimated you because you didn't announce your moves. They believed silence was weakness, when in fact silence was your shield. While they bragged, you studied. While they rushed to show off, you stayed patient. Cheating thrives on attention, but mastery thrives in stillness. So when the time came to face off, they were loud and predictable, while you were precise and unrateable. That is why you schooled them. You didn't need the crowd to know you were winning. You only needed the outcome to be undeniable. Their noise faded quickly, but your presence remained long after. They believed the scoreboard was the only thing that mattered. You knew the process mattered more, because even if they cheated and won for a moment, it wouldn't last. Hollow victories dissolve, solid ones grow stronger with time. You built a record that no trick could tarnish. And when their tricks were exposed, it wasn't only you who saw it, it was everyone around them. You didn't just beat them privately. You schooled them publicly by showing the difference between temporary applause and permanent respect. That kind of lesson cannot be undone. There is something poetic about the way you turned their own rigged system against them. Every time they tilted the board, you adjusted. Every time they stacked the odds, you adapted. They thought cheating gave them control, but in reality, it revealed their fear. And fear always collapses when met with someone who doesn't bend. By standing tall, you didn't only survive, you thrived. And the cruelest truth is this: they made the game harder for you. But in doing so, they made you stronger than they ever imagined. That is why your victory cuts deeper. They stacked the deck against you with the arrogance of gamblers who thought the game was fixed forever. They marked the cards, bent the rules, and smiled at each other as if you were already defeated. But the flaw in their scheme was hidden in the very tools they used. Counterfeit cards can only survive when no one dares to test them. You did not flinch. You didn't play at their frantic pace. You slowed the game until their tricks began to show under the weight of scrutiny. The house, no matter how grand, cannot stand when the foundation is a lie. They built their empire on sand, and you walked into the storm, prepared to show the world what happens when illusions are asked to hold real weight. They thought pressure would bury you, that a stacked deck meant your choices were irrelevant. But pressure doesn't bury truth, it reveals it. You carried yourself with a patience they couldn't imitate, because they were addicted to the quick rush of false victories. Every counterfeit card they threw was another sign of their weakness, and you collected those signs like evidence. They were too blinded by their own manipulation to see the inevitable collapse waiting. You schooled them without shouting, without rage, only with the cruel consistency of someone who knows real strength doesn't rush. The more they cheated, the more obvious it became that they were terrified of facing you on equal ground. In relationships, they stacked the deck with lies, with carefully staged gestures, with half-truths designed to sway your heart. They assumed you would never notice, But lies are counterfeit cards, and under the pressure of time, they always bend. You didn't need to accuse them. You simply lived long enough to let the weight of truth expose them. And when it did, their entire performance collapsed. The love they pretended to offer, the loyalty they claimed to give, all crumbled like ash in your hands, They underestimated the endurance of someone willing to wait, someone who values consistency over drama. In the end, they had to watch you walk away without begging, laughing at the fact that their carefully rigged game couldn't break you. In self-growth, the world stacks the deck with distractions, with shortcuts dressed as opportunities, and with voices telling you to quit before you even begin. They bet on you folding early, like most people do. But you refused to fold. You played the long game, even when the cards looked hopeless. And because you chose persistence over comfort, every counterfeit card life threw eventually revealed its weakness. Challenges meant to break you became lessons that built you. What was designed to stop you became the very thing that trained you. The house always crumbles when it's fake, and you were there to collect the pieces and rebuild something real. That is why you walked out stronger, while others remained trapped at the same table, losing to a crooked dealer. They wanted you to believe the game was unwinnable. That was their greatest illusion. By stacking the deck, they made you believe they had control. But the truth was crueler for them. They never had control, they only had distraction. You discovered that control isn't about the cards on the table, but about the composure of the player, And your composure became the one thing they couldn't counterfeit. While they panicked when things slipped, you stayed steady, And that steadiness broke their illusion faster than any accusation could. They thought you needed fair odds to win. You proved you only needed resilience. Psychology says people who cheat are not confident. They are desperate. Their counterfeit cards revealed their fear of what you could do if the game was played straight. That fear is why they tampered in the first place. And in trying to cheat you, they gave away their greatest weakness. And they showed that they could not stand against you without tilting the board. You understood this, and that's why you stayed calm. You didn't need to fight their tricks with more tricks. Then you fought with patience, with consistency, with truth. And the truth always ruins the counterfeit. When their house collapsed, it wasn't only you who saw it. Everyone watching understood what had happened. Their empire of fake victories was exposed. Their performance became transparent. You didn't just beat them privately. You humiliated their entire approach publicly. The counterfeit never holds up under light, and you brought them into the light without even needing to raise your voice. That is why they fear you now. Not because you shouted, not because you fought dirty, but because you dismantled them with the one thing they could never fake: authenticity. They spent years stacking their deck, thinking it made them untouchable. But what they built was fragile, always one storm away from crumbling. You, on the other hand, spent years building substance, skill, and discipline. You didn't look powerful at first. You didn't dazzle crowds with tricks. But when the counterfeit house collapsed, you were still standing. You became undeniable, not because the game was fair, but because you never needed it to be. They needed control of the rules. You only needed control of yourself. And that is why the ending was already written. There is cruelty in how easy it looked for you. Because they spent so much time preparing illusions, and you destroyed them with one thing they couldn't counterfeit: endurance. Their entire strategy depended on you panicking. Instead, you laughed. You let their counterfeit cards pile up until they couldn't hide them anymore. And when their house fell, you didn't gloat, you didn't explain. You simply stood there free, untouchable, undeniable. That quiet victory is the one they cannot live down. Manipulation breeds arrogance because it convinces the manipulator that their tricks will last forever. They start small, weaving lies, bending truths, steering people like pieces on a board. At first, it works. They see people bend to their words. They see situations shift in their favor, and they mistake this temporary control for permanent power. That is where arrogance takes root. They begin to believe no one can see through them, that their illusions will stand the test of time. You knew better. You understood that arrogance is blind, and blindness always leaves cracks. You waited. You let their arrogance grow heavy. You let them stack deception until the weight became too much to hide. And when exposure came, it was not a storm, it was a mirror. They looked in and saw themselves for the fraud they always were. They never prepare for exposure because arrogance convinces them it will never arrive. Manipulators thrive in shadows, but arrogance pushes them into the light without realizing it. They start talking louder, flaunting their influence, and showing their hand because they believe they cannot be touched. You let them dig their own grave with every arrogant move. They believed they were tightening chains around you, but in truth, they were tying knots around their own neck. The cruel irony is that exposure doesn't come from you attacking. It comes from them overplaying. You stayed silent while their arrogance became so loud that it betrayed them. In relationships, manipulation looks like control disguised as care, deceit disguised as love, selfishness disguised as sacrifice. They rig the emotional deck, thinking you will always be the obedient player in their game. At first, it may work. They get compliance, they get reaction, they get power. But arrogance makes them sloppy. They think you won't notice patterns. They think you will always believe the act. But you noticed everything. You waited, you endured. You let their arrogance become their undoing. And when the mask finally slipped, they weren't ready, because they had convinced themselves it could never slip at all. Arrogance blinds them to reality. Then it makes them underestimate those who remain quiet. They confuse silence with ignorance, patience with weakness, and composure with submission. You weaponized that blindness. You played your role in their story until the story turned against them. By the time exposure came, they had already destroyed their own credibility. That's the cruelty of it. You didn't even need to strike. They handed you their downfall while laughing at you, never realizing the laugh would be their last before silence consumed them. Psychology reveals that manipulators cannot stop once they begin. Each success feeds their ego. Each trick convinces them they are untouchable. But arrogance is never sustainable. It drives them to go too far, to push too hard, to take risks they cannot cover. And when that moment comes, exposure arrives like fire to paper. Their arrogance is tender and their manipulation is the spark. You understood this cycle, thing, and that's why you didn't rush. You let their arrogance ripen into carelessness. Then you watched as the truth set everything ablaze. They always believe exposure will destroy the other person, never themselves. They think if truths come to light, it will hurt you more. That's why they double down, manipulate harder, believing the spotlight will burn you. But arrogance forgets that truth favors the one who builds on it. Lies rot when revealed. You were built on truth, so when the light hit, thin only strengthened you. They, however, collapsed because they were made of shadows. Their arrogance never prepared them for the day when shadows no longer mattered. In life, manipulation is a short-term strategy. It builds results that look impressive but cannot endure. Arrogance makes manipulators believe the short term is enough, that appearances are reality. You knew the opposite. You knew reality doesn't need to dress itself up. So while they performed, you built. While they schemed, you endured. Their arrogance grew loud while your work grew quiet. And when the quiet emerged, it silenced their entire performance. Exposure was not dramatic. It was inevitable. They will call it unfair. They will tell themselves you got lucky, that circumstances betrayed them. But you know better. They betrayed themselves. The manipulation always plants the seed of destruction, and arrogance waters it. Exposure is not a surprise. It is the harvest. You simply stood long enough to watch the field rot. They were too arrogant to consider that day would ever come. That's why their collapse looked sudden, but in truth, it was slow and inevitable. You schooled them not by fighting on their level, but by refusing to fall for their illusions. You let them believe they had you. You let them celebrate small victories, thinking they were ahead. That patience broke them more than any confrontation, because arrogance doesn't prepare for stillness. It panics when silence stares back. And in the end, you didn't have to expose them. Their arrogance did the work for you. You only had to stand and let the truth arrive. They cheated you because they feared what you would become if the game was played fairly. They couldn't stomach the idea of you standing on equal ground because they knew equal ground would never be equal. It would tilt in your favor. So they stacked the board, altered the rules, whispered lies, and pulled strings in desperation. Cheating wasn't their sign of confidence. It was their confession of weakness. Fear sat behind every move they made. They did not cheat because you were small. They cheated because you were already too large for them to contain. And that is the cruelty of fear. It forces the coward to reveal his trembling hand, even as he pretends to hold control. Fear is never silent. It always leaks. They thought their tricks were invisible, that you wouldn't notice the way they twisted reality to slow you down. But fear cannot hide forever. It shows itself in over-explaining, in overcompensating, in frantic decisions meant to protect what they know they cannot defend. You saw it. You watched them scramble. And the more they tried to disguise their fear with cheating, the more obvious it became that they had no other weapon left. The moment someone cheats, they declare they have already lost the honest battle. You understood this, and you let their own fear expose them. In relationships, their cheating was born from the same place. They feared being truly known, because being known meant being measured against truth. They feared your growth, your independence, your ability to walk away without begging. So they cheated. They tried to manipulate, to distract, to keep your eyes elsewhere. But fear is sloppy, and their games were always destined to unravel. When the mask fell, it wasn't just betrayal that cut deep. It was the realization that they feared your strength more than they valued your bond. Fear made them sacrifice the very thing they pretended to protect. Fear-driven cheating always carries arrogance on its back. They thought you wouldn't notice, thought you were too trusting, too distracted, too naive to catch them. But arrogance cannot erase fear. It only hides it for a moment. You saw through the act, and once you saw it, their power over you evaporated. That is the beauty of exposure. It doesn't need revenge. It doesn't need confrontation. It only needs recognition. Once you recognize their fear, their tricks collapsed like wet paper. Because fear always reveals its hand, and once revealed, it has no more cards left to play. Psychology shows that fear-driven people seek shortcuts not because they want to win, but because they want to avoid the pain of losing. That was their game. Then they wanted to keep the illusion alive, to protect their fragile sense of superiority, to avoid the humiliation of facing you without crutches. But fear creates patterns, and patterns cannot be hidden for long. Every lie became another breadcrumb. Every trick became another trail. You didn't need to chase them. You only needed to wait for the trail to lead them into exposure. And it always does. They feared your composure. That is why they cheated. They saw that you didn't rush, that you didn't crave recognition, that you weren't desperate for applause. Fear tells the insecure that calmness is danger, because calmness means control. You terrified them not with noise, but with silence. They cheated to break that silence, to rattle you, to force you into chaos where they believed you would slip. But you didn't slip. You stayed grounded, and in doing so, you forced their fear into the open. Their hands shook while yours remained steady, and that alone was enough to show the world who really held power. Cheating always creates its own collapse. They thought it was their weapon, but in reality it was their downfall. Because every trick requires maintenance. Every lie requires another lie to cover it. Fear creates desperation, and desperation always overreaches. You didn't have to fight them directly. You let the weight of their cheating crush them. Their fear was not just visible to you, it became visible to everyone who watched. And when fear is revealed, respect disappears. They didn't just lose the game, they lost credibility forever. In life, those who cheat because of fear are already admitting they see you as a threat. That is the compliment hidden in their betrayal. They did not waste energy rigging the game for someone beneath them. They did it for you. Because they knew you had the discipline to outlast them, the intelligence to outthink them, the presence to outshine them. Fear wrote the script of their every move. You didn't even need to fight for dominance. Their fear handed it to you. There is cruelty in how simple it all looks once the truth emerges. They believed they were clever, but their cheating only highlighted their panic. You walked away not only victorious, but aware of a truth they never wanted you to see. That fear makes people reveal themselves faster than honesty ever could. They showed you who they were without you ever needing to demand it. They confessed their weakness every time they cheated. That is why your strength burns them. You didn't just endure their fear, you let it destroy them. The real schooling was never in the moment you stood tall with the victory in your hands. The real lesson was the cold, crushing weight that fell on them when they realized their cheating had bought them nothing. They bent rules, whispered lies, stacked odds, and still failed. That truth haunts them because it forces them to admit something darker than defeat. It forces them to accept that even when everything was tilted in their favor, they still could not match you. Their advantage was never real. Their schemes were nothing more than smoke, and their power was a costume that disintegrated under pressure. Your win was expected. Their realization was the punishment. They thought cheating made them invincible. They believed their tricks would hide the gaps in their ability. But the exposure came when those tricks collapsed in the face of your discipline. You didn't win by surprise. You won with inevitability. That inevitability is what crushed them. Because nothing destroys arrogance more than seeing it rendered useless, no matter how carefully it was constructed. They didn't just lose. They discovered they were never even contenders. The fight was lost before it began, because while they were learning deception, you were mastering truth. In relationships, the same lesson applies. They may lie, manipulate, or deceive to keep control, believing that betrayal places them above you. But when the dust settles, the realization hits them. They never had control to begin with. They thought cheating gave them power, but it only revealed their fear of losing you. And when you rise beyond it, when you remain unshaken, they are forced to face the truth that even their worst betrayal wasn't enough to break you. That is the real schooling. The understanding that their deepest act of treachery still left them powerless over you. Arrogance convinces cheaters that tricks equal intelligence. They thought their schemes were genius moves that would guarantee dominance. But arrogance never prepares for exposure, and exposure revealed their schemes as clumsy, desperate, and weak compared to your patience. They were schooled not because you punished them, but because you allowed them to punish themselves. You stood back, steady, while their web of lies collapsed on their own heads. That collapse carries a sting no victory lap could ever deliver. Thing. It is the realization that they fought with illusions while you carried weapons forged in reality. Thing. Psychology explains that cheaters lean on deception because they are terrified of facing themselves. By rigging the game, they think they erase the possibility of defeat. Thing. But what they create is far crueler. They ensure that when defeat arrives, it is 10 times heavier, because it reveals that even with help, with schemes, with every edge, thing, they were never strong enough. And that is the difference.